Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Weekly Brief. This is for the week of June 23rd, 2025. Hopefully, school is wrapped up or is starting to wrap up for you. You're getting a time to relax. Thankfully, the legislature is also starting to relax. They wrapped up most of their work last week. So we have maybe a few more days left in the legislature, but most of the big work has already been done. So I'm going to walk you through that right now. Also, should say I'm Robbie Feinberg. I'm the Director of Communications and Government Relations for the Maine School Management Association, and I will start to walk you through where we are at right now in the legislative process, what bills passed, what bills didn't pass, what we're watching for next year, giving you a general overview of what we saw and what we're expecting going forward. So let's share the screen. All right, so let's get underway. Again, a wrap up from the legislature this week. So, where are we at? So, number one, nearly all of the legislative work is done for the year. The thousands of bills that we did here this year, nearly all of them have made their full way through the House and the Senate, and eventually some of them making their way to the governor's desk. Nearly all of that has been done already. We saw the legislature pass a Part 2 budget last week, which wraps up much of their fiscal work. However, the House and the Senate, they will be reconvening this week as well for just a little bit more work. They're going to be doing something called running the table. This is a part of the appropriations process where whatever money is left over, they're going to be deciding which bills that they do want to fund. So we'll give you a little bit of details about that, how that whole process works. And then what we still might see over the next few days and weeks, Governor Mills, she has to either sign a lot of bills, let them go unsigned into law, or she can also veto many bills as well. So we'll be watching very closely, seeing what bills she decides to veto if she does decide to make that choice. And if that does happen, then the legislature will have to come back and decide whether to override those vetoes. So it means that we'll probably still have a few more legislative days, but nothing like what we saw over the past 3 weeks or so, where it was really nonstop debates, discussions, votes within the House and the Senate. So let's talk a little bit about what actually did pass. We'll kind of go step by step. So one of the things we wanted to highlight was the supplemental budget. This was that Part 2 budget that the legislature did eventually pass last Wednesday, that narrowly passed through the House and the Senate. Most of the funding for schools was already included in the Part 1 budget that was passed several months ago. That bill already included the 55% for education for the next 2 years, which we are very happy to see that passing. Also, I know many of you had questions about the people's veto effort as well. That veto effort was not successful. They were not able to get that onto the ballot, so the budget will stay into place as is, which is important, offering certainty to our schools, to our communities across the state. Now, this Part 2 budget, what was included was specifically something that our organization and others had really been pushing for. Universal school meals, this program that we've had now for going on about 4 years, there was about $6 million that still needed to be funded for that universal school meals program over the next 2 years. And thankfully, that was included in the Part 2 budget, which we were really encouraged to see. That will mean that universal school meals will continue for the next 2 years. The other thing that's important that was also included was language around maximizing federal funding for school meals. What this language does is it basically require that any districts that are eligible for the community eligibility provision. This is a federal program that will provide free school meals for an entire school if they are above a certain free and reduced price lunch level, if they're above a certain poverty level. And this requires that any schools that are eligible for that do get that funding. They are applying and participating in that program. And that will make sure that we get as much federal funding as possible for our school meals, and so that the state doesn't have to pay more. So we're really encouraged about this. And what this probably is going to mean is that the DOE is going to be working more closely with your schools over the next few months, over the next year, to really try to make sure that they all are participating in this program. But the big message is that school meals, universal school meals, will continue for the next 2 school years, which we are very happy to see. A few other things we wanted to highlight. One around school finance. We've already talked about LD 1103. This is around unallocated fund balances, allowing schools to continue to be able to carry over 9% each year for their unallocated fund balances. This was a big priority. This did pass, which we were very happy to see. And then we expect to see more major changes coming up in the next legislative session. There was a bill that passed. It was more of a resolve. It was LD 318. And this basically requires the Maine Education Research Policy Institute, which has been studying the EPS funding formula for the past year or so. This requires MEPRI to really put forward recommendations and to do even more work, even more study of the EPS formula. And so that did pass, and that means that over the next few months, MEPRI will be doing more work. They'll be submitting a report to the legislature, and we expect that that could lead to some potential changes to the funding formula in the next legislative session, which does come next year. And they'll also be looking at some pretty important things. Special education has been a big cost driver. It's been a big topic this session. They'll be looking at kind of ways in which that could potentially be reformed, the costs of that. And then they'll also be looking at potentially how to look at the economically disadvantaged rate and the weights associated with students who are economically disadvantaged, getting more funding to them. So those are just a few areas that they will be looking at over the next few months. Student behavior, we've talked about this as well. LD 1248 did pass, and this was signed by the governor, and this will make some changes to the restraint and seclusion laws in the state. What it will really do, though, is allow our educators to more quickly act and help students and support students if they are acting out, if there are any dangerous student behaviors, they'll be able to more quickly respond to those situations and really create more of a safer classroom for themselves, for students, for their whole classroom, for their schools. You'll see there kind of the details of what this looks like, and I'm sure more will be released from the department around this, but we are really encouraged by this. We feel like this will really help our teachers, our educators to be able to have safer classrooms all across our state. Then there are a few other bills around student behavior that have made their way to the appropriations table as well. One of them is de-escalation training. There's also another bill around actually training for ed techs. Both of these we know would be very expensive, so it would need substantial state funding to make this happen. But there are bills around both of these that are on the appropriations table. And if someone does choose to provide that funding to allow that to come off of the appropriations table, then that could end up passing. But, lawmakers have acknowledged that, requiring and adding this sort of training would be very expensive. However, that is just kind of one way of looking at taking on these student behavior challenges. And then there is also another bill on the appropriations table that would provide more funding for behavioral and mental health services for students. We've actually seen these services have to be cut back by certain providers because the funding formula just isn't working for a lot of schools and specifically for these providers. So this would really help to fill in those gaps and to allow schools and specifically those providers to strengthen those programs. That was about $1.3 million a year. There will be limited funding, but we really do view that as an important way of really helping students with their emotional health. So we'll see where those go in the months ahead. Then we wanted to highlight just a couple new policies. We've talked about these already, but wanted to bring them up once again because we're just at the end of the session here. But there will be two new policies that we know of right now that your school district will need to deal with over the next few years. One of them has gotten a lot of attention. This is LD 1234. This is the one around cell phones in classrooms. And what this says is that by August 1st, 2026, a school board will need to adopt and implement a policy related to the use of personal electronic devices during the school day, including the use of cell phones and smartwatches. As you see, this isn't an outright ban on cell phones, but what it is saying is that your school board will need to review your policies on this, and you will need to specifically make sure that you are addressing them in policy. You get to decide what you want to do. We know a lot of schools are really moving in the direction of that bell-to-bell ban and are really going in that direction because of the research that we've been seeing about the worries around personal technology with students and social media with students. So we anticipate there will probably be more districts that go in that direction, but also some may, not put on quite as much of restrictions when it comes to that. That will be left up to local control. We think this is a smart approach going forward, and we know that your school boards will likely have this come up just over the next year or so to really discuss this and decide what is going to be best for your local schools. Then another policy we wanted to highlight, LD11. This is around actually temperature standards in schools. And this is kind of a similar approach to LD1234. This new law, it's going to require school districts to actually create policies around temperature standards in your school buildings. However, there will be no restrictions, nothing laying out what you have to have those standards be, what it has to look like. There really is very little guidance on what you have to do. You just are going to have some sort of policy around this. It will also require the Department of Education to provide guidance to schools on these policies. So we are expecting that there will be some state assistance in terms of determining what this should look like, and you'll be having to do more of that work within your district on that policy as well over the next few months and years. So what was voted down? A lot of things were voted down over the session. We've talked a lot about the bills that, couldn't get a majority in committee and did fall down. Some of these were those school choice bills that we talked about, school vouchers, charter school expansions. Those were all defeated. There were a lot of bills around new mandates around curriculum, or some around actually professional development and the recording of professional development. Some real concerning bills around that. Those were all defeated, which we were very happy to see. We also saw last week that many of the bills were brought up around transgender athletics, bills that were concerning that issue. There were roughly 8 of them on this issue, and all of those bills were defeated pretty handily, particularly in the Senate. So we don't anticipate any changes, at least on the state level, around that issue. We also wanted to talk about student transfers, which was surprisingly a big topic this session. There were, I think, right around 4 different bills around student transfers. These were all ultimately defeated in the House and the Senate. 3 of them, the Education Committee voted down. 2 of them were almost like school choice bills. They would have allowed, real expansion of almost school choice through the student transfer process. Those were defeated handily. Another one would have allowed for automatic renewals of transfers as well. We had real concerns around that, and that was ultimately defeated. Then there was one bill that we were really pushing for that would have made some real targeted adjustments to the process that we felt like was going to allow for a lot more transparency, a lot more collaboration between schools and parents. It was going to help to improve this process and really reduce any conflict, really to help to strengthen what this process was going to look like. This was LD 1719. This passed through the House of Representatives with real bipartisan strong support. 83 to 50 was the vote. There were many Republicans who came on board with nearly every Democrat as well, which we were really encouraged to see. But unfortunately, in the Senate, this bill lost by 1 vote. It was 18 to 17. And, senators were really, they really believed in their positions and they would not move on this. So unfortunately, that bill did fall in the Senate. However, we hope to do more work around this to help to create, more best practices across the state. So you'll certainly be hearing more from me and others at our organization on student transfers in the months and the years ahead. Now, I just wanted to quickly talk about the special appropriations table, because even though the legislature is mostly done with its work, there are still, I think the number is more than 300 bills that are currently on the special appropriations table. And what happens here is that a bill may move through the House and the Senate and may get approved, but if it requires really any kind of funding, if it requires more money, or if it requires more work and more activities on the local level as well, then it will get put on the special appropriations table. And the rules basically are it will stay on that table unless the state is able to provide funding for any of these initiatives. They're able to find funding for that. And you will see a list of bills right there that are currently on the table. So one of the big ones is increasing the minimum teacher salary. This is very expensive. This is nearly $6 million for the next school year. And that one is because of that number is on the special appropriations table right now. But others as well. There's a bill around funding to promote best practices for math and English proficiency, some around reducing student homelessness, continuing the program, the pilot program that's been going on. Some around we talked about de-escalation training. That's on the special appropriations table. Some around increasing summer school programming. So quite a number of bills are on that table, as well as bills on a whole host of stuff that isn't education, of course. So there's lots of bills fighting for a very small amount of funding. What we have seen, that number is only about $7 million after accounting for what was spent in the state budget and those sorts of things as well. So that will mean a very small amount of money that can be used to fund hundreds of bills. So what that will likely mean is that only a small fraction of those bills on the table will ultimately get funded and will ultimately become law, and the others unfortunately would die. So we will see what happens there. The legislature is expected to meet at some point this week to really talk through the appropriations process and really, kind of run the table is what the term is, and we'll see what bills ultimately do get funded that way. Then we wanted to talk about a little bit about what to watch for next year and the second legislative session. So the second session, this one is a shorter session. So this will actually begin next January of 2026, and it'll extend through right around April. Now, things can clearly change. There could be a special session, things like that, but that's at least the general expectation. And there are rules around what bills are able to be heard there. A lot of the time, it's just budget bills. They're department bills, just very certain bills that are able to actually be submitted and heard. So we expect many fewer bills for that session. However, there are some bills that are getting carried over from this year to that year, carried over from this session to the next session, and we can at least give you a preview of the bills that we expect to be discussed. So one of them is a bill we have been very loud about. You all are probably well aware about right now. This is LD 653. This is the one on teacher overtime. Because of your pushback and your advocacy, this bill actually didn't end up even receiving a vote in the House or the Senate this year. Because there was real concern about this bill, but it did get put back to the Labor Committee. It was sent back to the Labor Committee, and that was approved to be carried over to next year. So what that means is that we are going to need your advocacy next year. We are going to need you to share with your representatives, specifically the ones on the Labor Committee, but also the full House and the Senate as well, why this bill is so concerning. So we'll need to keep up that advocacy there. We are really pleased that this bill actually didn't even get to a vote. It shows that, there was real questions about it, but we will need more advocacy moving forward. Some other topics that we expect. So one of them, there's been a bill around school board recall and working towards seeing if can be more standardization across the state of what would be the reasons for a school board member to be recalled and why they wouldn't be, and really trying to create a bill around that. That one was carried over to the next session, and MSBA has really been working on that issue quite a bit with the bill sponsor, so we expect that to continue in the months ahead. A few others, I mentioned school finance, the EPS formula, that is going to be a big topic next year, and then school construction as well. The Governor's Commission on School Construction is expected to submit their final report by the end of this year. And the Education Committee has really indicated that they hope to use that report to really help to design and put forward a bill that could potentially do a lot of work around the school construction process and really help to improve that process moving forward. So those are some big ones we're expecting around education. We expect a lot more issues will surely arise in the months ahead before the next legislative session, but that at least gives you a rough preview of what we are watching for next year. Now, what can you do in the meantime? So we've got probably what, 6 months or so. We'll be involved, still having conversations about legislation, but what can you do? The biggest thing you can do before the next session is connecting with your local legislature, keeping the dialogue open. One thing I'll really remind you of, particularly near the beginning of the school year, is trying to maybe inviting your legislator to the first day of school or the first week of school. Discuss the effects of federal legislation, potential hurtful federal legislation. Discuss what's happening there. Discuss why programs like Title I have been so important and what that funding is going towards. But also, just bringing a legislator inside your school makes a big difference. Show them the amazing classrooms. Show them the amazing students. Show off the teachers that are doing really great stuff. This is really important as a way of showing all the awesome stuff that we know is happening within our public schools. So what's really important is just to keep that dialogue going, keep it alive. And specifically, summer, fall are great times because your legislator probably won't be super busy with the legislative session, but I know they would love to go to your school to talk about these sorts of issues and to really be in touch more with you about that. So that's a really great way, a really important step that you can take. So we would really encourage you to do that sort of work over the next few months, probably beginning in late summer, early fall. So that is about all that we have for you this week. It has been a very busy session. There still are a few more days to come. We will update you as things continue to change. But for now, thank you so much for all of your work, your partnership, your advocacy, and we will certainly be in touch as things do continue in the months and the years ahead. Thanks so much.